So other than precious metals, are there any other options that you talk about with people in terms of protecting their savings?
Sure, absolutely. And granted, not everybody can do these things, and that's kind of the nice thing about metals is that anybody can buy and hold metals. And if you're talking about particularly large sums of money, you can haul around on your back a large amount of money if you allocate it into gold, because gold is obviously far more compact than silver is, and anybody can do it. Now, my business before was, of course, cattle. So I've always advocated, putting money into cattle, productive farm ground, productive grazing ground, anything that is producing actual real commodities. And in our case, you can't get any better because we're talking about food, and food is a commodity that will pace inflation. I mean, no matter what, it will pace inflation, even if you have the market. Let's say the oligarchy in Washington, when food prices just really get completely out of control, they try to put in price caps and price freezes and so on and so forth. When governments start doing things like that, the food commodities will still pace inflation because a black market will emerge. And so, yeah, so you're always, with food commodities, you're always going to be beautifully hedged against inflation. So for my guys, I mean, it was always very edifying when we would have this conversation in the schools that I would teach, say, you guys are positioned so well, you have food commodities, you have productive ground, you're just sitting pretty in all this, and oh my gosh, you guys, the price of cattle has just gone through the roof. Just since I went galt, working on a year ago, it was last spring that I went galt and moved into the van down by the river, the price of cattle is just through the roof. So my guys they're sitting pretty, but what I remind them is don't think for a second that you're rich. You're not rich. All you're doing is you're holding your ground. And what they need to do, and what I encourage them, and this maps onto other people as well, is that you need to take that increase in equity that you have realized because the commodity that you're holding has inflated in price. You need to take that equity and you need to use that to pay down any outstanding debt that you have and get yourself into a zero debt position as fast as you can, because hopefully as people are starting to learn and understand, over the last 35 years, all of the growth in the American economy, all of it has been driven by debt expansion. And this is Carl Denninger's brilliant foundational premise. I mean, he posts that chart about once a week of GDP growth and debt growth quarter to quarter. And the debt growth line since the Carter administration has been well above the GDP growth line, which means that all of the growth in the economy in the United States since the Carter administration has required more debt than the GDP growth actually was. And there was a point within the last decade, I can't remember exactly which year it was, I think 2004 or 2006, I'd have to look at the chart. Maybe it was 2008, when the ratio actually got 7-1 in the United States. It took $7 of new debt expansion to generate $1 in GDP growth. And just stop and think about that. And think about how much technology has developed and progressed since the Jimmy Carter years, and then realize that even with all of that, even with the advent of the internet and all of these things, that it required taking on multiples of debt in order to get that to happen.
Well, debt tends to feed on itself, right? I mean, you get this runaway exponential growth eventually where you're paying to service the debt, and it's becoming less and less efficient way to raise capital.
Indeed, and that is why we're now in the endgame. And what the oligarchy is looking at is they're looking at the mathematical endgame here, and understand there's only a few people in the government that understand any of this. Most of the people in the federal government, in the United States Congress, such as it is, it's a completely meaningless body, obviously. The government's been overthrown. The Congress has no meaning anymore. But these people, look at these people. Do you think they have the foggiest clue about any of this? Do you think that these people are even intelligent enough to understand the simple algebra behind these concepts? Do you think that these people could sit down and work through a problem involving exponential growth curves? No, absolutely not. There's a few people, maybe way up in the government, who have come out of the banking paradigm, and let's be honest now, it's all the same. I mean, Goldman, JP Morgan, Citi, I mean, the line between those entities and the federal government is so utterly blurred now that it's pretty much non-existent. It's basically all the same cadre of oligarchs. There's a few oligarchs who understand what's going on, and so they see that we're mathematically probably within 2 cycles of the whole thing collapsing on itself, and by that I mean doubling cycles, and so what they are now looking at is they've got to get capital, they've got to get collateral. That's what they need. And what they're looking at is retirement funds, which are in excess of 10 trillion in the United States. They have been saying for years, I mean, there's presentations by people who are in tight with the Obama regime that they are looking to completely nationalize all of that, take all of the 401k money and all of the IRA money, all the pension money, and turn it into UST bonds. Well, that's it right there. I mean, you'll never see any of it. And just turn it into Social Security 2.0. Everybody has to contribute to their little quote-unquote savings account every month, and the government will take good care of it for you. All it is it's stealing collateral.
And we've seen that happen in Poland, right?
Yes, that's exactly what they did in Poland, precisely. They seized the private pension accounts in Poland. I believe I think they just swept them for 50% is what they did this last go around in Poland, and just said, okay, we're haircutting everyone's private retirement money, and you get bonds back. Well, let's face it, bonds are trash in this day and age because there's no rule of law. If there's no rule of law, there's no contract law, there's no way to enforce anything. Paper, it is worthless. Contracts are worthless. Bonds are worthless. Stocks are worthless if there's no rule of law. And so that's what we're just into. We're into this phase of confiscation, and it will get more and more bold as the situation becomes more and more dire and more desperate. And so the criticism that I and a lot of others that we get is, you guys have been talking about this for years, and, well, actually, we did see the confiscation in Poland. Well, never mind that. And, we actually did see Cyprus, where all of those people got their bank accounts swept, but, never mind that. You people, just because these things are actually happening doesn't mean that they're actually happening, and that doesn't mean that you're right. It hasn't happened to me yet, so therefore it hasn't happened at all. And you guys have been talking about this for years, and it hasn't happened yet. Well, that's what they said to Winston Churchill and all of the people who were warning about Hitler until the day before Hitler rolled tanks into Poland. Up until the day before Hitler rolled tanks into Poland, it was, you people have been going on and on and on about how dangerous Hitler is and about how this is all going to lead to some war, and it hasn't happened yet. You people are all a bunch of dithering ninnies, and you just need to sit down and be quiet.
Chicken Little saying the sky is falling, right?
Exactly.
Isn't Social Security another good example of facts, though, that if people say it hasn't happened to me yet, it's like, oh, really? Why don't you find out how much Social Security value you actually have stored up in your name for all those contributions you've put in?
Oh, but sweetie, that would involve doing math, and math is hard, and we just can't be bothered to think about doing arithmetic and calculating interest and comparing inflation rates and things like that. We just want to believe that the government is very smart and very kind and benevolent and good, and the government would never lie to us, and the government is going to take care of us, because we are a culture that has been castrated, has had all masculine strength bled from it, and so people, especially men in this culture, and women because they're women, just want to lay back and believe that someone else is going to take care of them. And we just don't want to face reality, and we don't want to think about these things. And there is no greater bludgeon of reality than arithmetic. And so we just don't want to even begin to think about arithmetic.
And it may not be possible to wake up everyone, but a lot of our listeners and people we've talked to are already convinced that they have serious, serious concerns. They're convinced that others are not going to take care of them. The government is not going to take care of them. Some of them have thought, well, maybe the bank is a safe place, but I think we've been through enough examples of showing where the risks are inherent in that. And it's interesting that your top three, if I can summarize, are food, reducing debt, and then finding stores of value such as precious metals. We talked to David Morgan about 2 weeks ago, and those are exactly the same, his top three recommendations. And I thought it was an interesting twist when you talked about food, is food production.
Yeah.
In other words, you don't have to worry about the freshness date if you've got food on the hoof, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are a lot of my guys who are definitely branching out and learning how to kill on site. You know, that's kind of a lost art, slaughtering on site, home slaughter and all that. A lot of my guys have indicated, yeah, I've gone and sought out people who have taught me how to do that. And farm ground. I mean, farm ground has its drawbacks. You have to have, first of all, we're talking about a lot of money because, you want to talk about the price of something inflating since Obama got in. Let's talk about productive farm ground.
And property taxes.
And property, yes, indeed. When Obama was usurped and was installed in January of 2009, there was super, super high-end corn farm ground in central and south central Illinois going for $5,500 an acre. And we were all just aghast at this. Oh my gosh, that's so high. Can you believe that? $5,500 an acre. Where do you think that same ground is going? What do you think that same ground is going for now? Oh, try $15,000. Try $15,000 an acre. And why did that happen? Because the big, and we're talking big, smart money in both North America and Europe saw what was going on, realized they needed to allocate enormous amounts of money into physical commodities, and productive farm ground was at the top of that list. There have been big money buyers of farm ground in North America, and it's kind of scary, but it isn't just big money people. It's also entities like China that have been buying farm ground in North America.
So how does that scale down to the individual family then? Most individual families aren't going to own a herd of cattle unless it's perhaps a small herd of their own. And we certainly know of folks who are getting small acreages for their families, community-supported agriculture, forming close relationships with good friends in their local community who do have the productive ground and they can cooperate with them and trade services or whatever for that. Is there any other way that people can, on a very household scale, can enact some of these reforms to their own domestic castle?
Absolutely. If you think about that, that is the historical civilizational paradigm. The historical paradigm has not been, massive corporate ownership of enormous sprawling tracts of land. Even when you're talking about back into Europe, when you're talking about nobility and so forth, you still have to drill down to the fact that that land was divided up into small parcels, and a small parcel was managed by one family. Okay, that's the paradigm for agriculture and food production throughout human history. So this notion that, well, it's impossible for a relatively small tract of land to support a family, that's completely fallacious. You have to know what you're doing. You have to have the skill set. But of course, it's possible. Of course, it can be done. The other thing you want to look at, especially right now, is arbitraging the spread between urban real estate and rural real estate. Let's face it, most people in North America and in Western civilization in general, they do not want to live in rural areas. They want to live in a city or in very, very close proximity to a city, hence suburbia.
Access to metropolitan life.
Exactly. And so you look at the price per acre, let's call it per acre, of real estate in an urban or suburban area, and then compare that to the price per acre in a very rural environment. And what you quickly see is that if you're willing to move out of the urban environment, you can arbitrage and trade out of an urban parcel of real estate and get something in a rural area that is orders of magnitude larger than what you sold out of in town. And if you think about it, I mean, most houses in suburbia are built on a quarter of an acre. Okay, if you have equity in that, or let's say you own that, you sell that. Let's say you sell a $750,000 house in suburbia that's sitting on a quarter of an acre. You can turn that into hundreds of acres in rural America, but you have to be willing to make the sacrifice to not be dwelling in the urban environment, which frankly, in a wartime situation, I wouldn't want to be in an urban area anyway.